Hi, today we will be doing a PowerPoint presentation. How's IQ thought? Don't judge a book by its cover. We will actually be talking about why the Last Supper is a new Passover. But before we do that, we must first talk about what each of them mean.
The Passover is a Jewish holiday that is today celebrated around the world. The Passover is celebrated to commemorate the liberation of the Jewish people from Egypt. With both the help of Moses and God, the Jews were freed. This was not an easy achievement. Moses had sent 10 plagues on Egypt to force the Pharaoh to free the Jews. The plagues include the plague of blood, in which God ordered Moses to strike the river Nile with his staff, thus turning the river into blood. The second plague is the plague of frogs, in which God filled Egypt with frogs. The frogs went everywhere, into people's homes and into their bedrooms, and even into the kneading bowls. The third plague is the plague of lice, in which God ordered Moses to strike the dust of the land. And when he did so, all of Egypt's people and animals were covered in lice. The fourth plague is the plague of flies. God sent swarms of flies into people's homes all over Egypt. The fifth plague is the plague of livestock, in which God sent a severe pestilence in the cattle of Egypt. The sixth plague is the plague of boils, in which the Lord said to Moses, "Take for yourselves handfuls of ashes from a furnace, and let Moses scatter it towards the heavens, in sight of the Pharaoh." This caused boils to break out on both man and animals throughout Egypt. The seventh plague is the plague of hail. God ordered Moses to stretch his arms towards the heavens. This caused enormous amounts of hail to fall from the sky all throughout Egypt. The eighth plague is the plague of locusts, in which God covered Egypt in locusts, which ate all of Egypt's remaining crops and trees. The ninth plague is the plague of darkness, in which God told Moses to stretch his arms towards the heavens. In doing this, the sky fell into darkness for 3 whole days. 10th plague, God ordered all the firstborn of every living thing to die. The Israelites were excluded. The Pharaoh had enough, and he decided to set the Israelites free, thus creating what we know today as the Passover. To commemorate the Passover, Jews usually have a meal called the Passover Seder. The Passover Seder is the meal through which Jews commemorate the events of the Exodus. There are typically 2 seders on the first 2 nights of Passover, which last 7 to 8 days. People who eat the seder read a book called the Haggadah, which reenacts the events of the Exodus, and it starts the meal. The first book that is usually associated with Passover is matzah, which is unleavened bread. It's the same thing Christians eat when they receive Eucharist, and it's a reminder that the ancient Hebrews did not have enough time to let their bread rise because they were trying to leave Egypt. Usually in the middle of the Seder table, there is something called a Seder plate. On the Seder plate, we serve different foods to represent the Exodus experience. First, we have horseradish, which represents the bitterness of slavery. Next, we have an apple and nut-based mixture called koroset, which represents the mortar that the enslaved Israelites used to make the bricks for Pharaoh. Next, you have salt water, which represents the tears of the Israelites. Then you have parsley, which represents the springtime, in which the Passover is celebrated. Typically, we dip the parsley into the saltwater mixture. Next, we have a roasted egg. The egg represents a look back into the sacrifice that was offered in the temple in Jerusalem after the liberation from Egypt. Now finally, we have a bone that represents the unblemished lamb that was sacrificed in the Exodus. On the first day of Passover, Jesus said to his disciples to go to the city and prepare for the Passover. He told them to go to Jerusalem and find a man carrying a water jar. He told them to keep following him until he enters a house. Jesus told his disciples to enter the house and find the owner and tell him to take them to the large room in the house. He told them to go prepare for the feast. The disciples did as they were told to do. After everything was ready, Jesus arrived with the rest of his disciples. After everyone sat down to begin their meal, Jesus said to his disciples that one amongst his disciples would betray him. All of Jesus' disciples were shocked to hear this. They asked Jesus to reveal the name of the person so that person could be punished. But Jesus did not reveal who he was. Jesus said that the Lord will take care of him. Jesus continued the meal. Then he picked up a piece of bread. He told his disciples that this was my body. Then he picked up a wine glass and told his disciples that this was my blood. After Jesus' disciples finished the wine and bread, they sang a hymn. Then he told them that his time had come to an end, and that he would not be around for much longer. Jesus' disciples were shocked to hear this. They asked him why this was. Jesus told them that this was meant to happen. Soon after, Jesus was sacrificed on the cross. The Last Supper is considered to be a new Passover because we know the Last Supper was eaten as a Passover meal, which tells us that they both have a connection to the time of when they took place. But Jesus talks about the bread and wine at the Last Supper. He tells us that they are his body and his blood. This tells us that he is forming a new covenant with his blood and body. We can also see Jesus celebrated the Last Supper with his disciples, just like how today we celebrate the Passover with the ones closest to us. We also know that the Passover is celebrated as a sacrificial meal, just like how the Last Supper was eaten as a sacrificial meal. In the Passover, the rules for the sacrifice are that you must have a 1-year-old unblemished lamb with no broken bones. This connects to why Jesus is called the Lamb of God, because Jesus was sacrificed approximately 1 year after he was baptized. Also, when Jesus' body was taken off the cross, they noticed that he had no broken bones, just like how the lamb that must be sacrificed can't have any broken bones. This tells us why the Passover and the Last Supper are connected and similar, and it also tells us why the Last Supper is a new Passover.
I want to personally thank him. Arin?
I just want to chill.